Parks drive economic growth, support public safety, improve community health, and strengthen neighborhoods. Cities need a strong national voice to help shape policy and funding for parks, and that's exactly what City Parks Alliance provides.
Strong parks come from strong partnerships. And City Parks Alliance is one of the best places to build those partnerships. As the only multi-sector organization dedicated solely to the future of city parks, City Parks Alliance membership opens doors that designers simply can't access anywhere else.
City Parks Alliance brings together leaders who are driving progress in our communities. We share best practices, highlight our local projects, and help to shape a national conversation about parks as essential infrastructure.
Membership in City Parks Alliance gives public agencies the tools and data to strengthen our case for local public funding.
I know how important it is to invest in organizations that turn philanthropic dollars into visible, measurable, and lasting impact. Through programs and convenings like Greater and Greener, our staff and partners gain access to ideas, models, and relationships they can put directly into practice.
For park agencies around the country, the Alliance is a powerful resource for building partnerships, strengthening funding strategies, and elevating our impact. When park professionals learn from one another, our agencies, our parks, and our cities thrive.
The webinars are incredibly helpful. So to be able to be at my computer at home and listen for an hour or two about community engagement, or think about how parks can be better resilient pieces of infrastructure.
City Parks Alliance is providing information and sharing information for everyone that is trying to make these spaces the amazing places that they are.
I encourage other cities to join this network and tap into peers, partnerships, and programming that help great parks thrive.
Conference guests, please welcome to the stage Al Bangura, City Parks Alliance Board Co-Chair and Superintendent of Parks for the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board.
Good evening, good afternoon. Good to see you all. All right, so I hope you all are, well, first again, my name is Al Bangura, Superintendent. Good to see you all here, and I really hope you all are enjoying this wonderful conference. I know I am. And what I find magic in this conference is those moments that we are learning from each other. We're in these spaces together and talking about things that impact our agencies and our disciplines, and I'm always really excited about that. I'm learning also from our Austin hosts in my conversations, and I'm really grateful for that. So this is the one really great thing about Greater Greener. It is really one-of-a-kind experience, and I feel that every day with all of you. So thank you for being here, and excited about our plenary. So gathering here is not only inspiring, it gives us a space to have honest conversations with each other about the challenges that we face as part of our work and examine how we turn those challenges into opportunities that serve our communities better for all of us. We're living in a time of unpredictability, from 9/11 to the 2008 financial crisis to more recent COVID-19 pandemic. And we're experiencing more and more climate-related shocks like flooding, fires, extreme heat, not to mention the great political and cultural divisions that we are experiencing now in our country. But you know what's important? It's in this time of unpredictability, we are the constant, our parks. So in response, parks and recreation departments are adapting and collaborating across public agencies and sectors like never before to do more than ever before that we're being asked to do. Drawing on those assets, the expertise, and no small amount of creativity and innovation, parks practitioners are finding themselves serving more often as first responders, addressing urgent needs in their communities that they serve every single day. And I know about that firsthand in Minneapolis. In Minneapolis, the last several years have shown us that parks must be prepared to serve communities in ways that extend far beyond recreation. In 2020, the murder of George Floyd and COVID-19 pandemic and the emergence of encampments across our city created unprecedented challenges and urgent community needs that we had to address immediately. Our parks became places of healing. They became places of gathering, emergency response, protesting, and support. We had to be resilient, we had to be nimble, which you hear a lot, and willing to rethink our role in real time, every day, every second, every week, every minute. It was something that was really profoundly impacting. And just recently, of course, we had the Metro Surge once again tested our ability to adapt and to respond to a crisis. These experiences reinforced a powerful lesson. Parks are essential public infrastructure, and no agency cannot meet these challenges alone. Strong partnerships are critical to helping communities navigate disruption and emerge stronger. Minneapolis is and was resilient. Yeah. So, this afternoon, we are honored to have Lynn Ross moderate our plenary on new roles for park and recreation partners, or park partners in disruptive times, to explore these important issues. Lynn is globally recognized as an urbanist and founder for the Spirit for Change Consulting. She has been thinking about these challenges for a long time, going back to her previous leadership roles at the Knight Foundation, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Urban Land Institute, and the American Planning Association, and in her current role as board chair for the Alliance member Kaboom. So please join me in welcoming Lynn and our esteemed panel for today's plenary.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. How are you doing? It's great to be with you. I'm so delighted to be facilitating this session. I'm going to let my speakers get situated. It is that special time in the afternoon where we've come from a long lunch, and you maybe had some ice cream, and it's a little dark in here. So I thought we would start by doing a little exercise together just to get ourselves grounded and back in our bodies for this conversation. So we're going to do an exercise called 5 breaths. So I'm going to invite you to stand up if you like. And what we're going to do, it's as simple as it sounds. We're going to take 5 deep breaths together. But as we do that, I'm going to ask you to bring your hands towards your body. You can place them on your chest or your belly, because we're going to bring some good energy and mindsets in, and we're going to hold that. And as we exhale, we're going to push those hands out, and we're going to release some negative energy and sleepiness that we don't need this afternoon, okay? So in and hold, and then out. So give yourself a little bit of elbow room. If you would like to close your eyes for this, you can, if that helps you to focus. And of course, please breathe at your own pace. It is not meditation if you hyperventilate. Okay, are we ready? All right, here we go. On our first deep breath in, what we are bringing into our bodies is being joyfully and fully present in this experience. Joyfully and fully present in this experience. And as we exhale, nice and slow, what we are releasing is all of those daily disruptions and distractions that take us away from our purpose. We're letting that go, okay? On our second deep breath in, we are bringing in optimism and a belief that radical systems change is possible. Optimism and a belief that radical systems change is possible. And as we exhale again, nice and slow, what we're releasing this time is that feeling that our challenges are so big, so intractable, that there's nothing we can do. We're letting that go. On our third deep breath in, we are bringing in new ways of thinking, learning, and doing. New ways of thinking, learning, and doing. And as we exhale, nice and slow, you're doing great. What we're releasing this time is that feeling that we're really disappointed when we meet resistance to change. We're going to let that go because it's really frustrating, but we're going to let that go. On our fourth deep breath in, we are bringing in collaboration, fellowship, and a sense of belonging. Collaboration, fellowship, and a sense of belonging. And what we're releasing as we exhale nice and slow is feeling isolated in our work, feeling like we have to go it alone. We're going to let that go. Now, on our 5th breath, I want you to bring something into your body that you personally need this afternoon. Maybe it's something that I already said you need to reinforce, but maybe there's something else that you need to bring in. So go ahead and take that nice deep breath, bring that good energy in, hold it to you, and as you exhale, just release any of that remaining negative energy or mindset. All right, if you had your eyes closed, you can open them, and you're welcome to take your seats. How are you feeling? Good? All right. Now let's get back to our regularly scheduled plenary session. I am joined on stage by 3 remarkable leaders. Heather Lubov, who is the executive director, and taking some water, who's the executive director of the City Parks Foundation in New York City. Norma Edith Garcia Gonzalez, who is the director of the Los Angeles County Department of Parks and Recreation. And my good friend, Dan Rice, who is the president and CEO for a couple more weeks of the Ohio and Erie Canalway Coalition in Akron, Ohio. Dan's getting ready to retire. We're excited for him. Yeah. Now, as the session title suggests, and as Al alluded to, we are here to talk about leading in the face of disruption. But I think the bigger headline of this conversation is around what it means to become a more nimble and a more resilient leader as you navigate those disruptions. So before we get into our conversation, I want to give you, our audience, 4 things to sort of have in mind as you listen into this conversation. The first is that disruption is constant, right? Disruption is happening in our lives, whether we like it or not, every day, sometimes multiple times a day, right? And that disruption is happening at a variety of scales, right? Sometimes it's very personal, very close to home. Sometimes it's happening on the other side of the world, but it impacts us just the same. And the source of those disruptions varies as well, right? Sometimes it's work or your family. Sometimes it's politics, climate-related, health-related. I also think it's important to remember that sometimes the source of disruption isn't negative, right? Disruption can come from a positive place. It's still a disruption, it's still a catalyst for change, but I think it's important to remember that. So again, disruption is a constant. The second thing I want you to have in mind is what we mean when we say nimble leader or nimble leadership, right? What is that? This is an approach to leadership that I think has a few key elements. The first is it is rooted in deep humility and emotional intelligence. Nimble leaders are folks who are agile. They know when a pivot is needed and when to make it, and they're able to do that while still holding on to core values. This is also an approach to leadership that really goes beyond welcoming ideation and creativity, learning, adaptation, and actually embraces it, facilitates it even, while still being strategic in decision-making. And I think most importantly, this is an approach that really is about building deep, meaningful collaboration through trust and very transparent communications. You are gonna hear and see all of these elements, skills really, on display in the conversation that we're gonna have, but I want you to think also about how they resonate with you and your leadership style. You probably possess some or all of these skills, and that is the toolkit for being a nimble leader and helping to facilitate resilience. Speaking of resilience, the next thing that I want you to have in mind is that resilience is a muscle that we have to build continuously, right? Sometimes when we are facing crisis, we will use the term resilient. Oh, that person's so resilient, that organization is so resilient. But really what we're talking about is that they bounced back. But we know that sometimes bouncing back to some steady state, maybe that state actually wasn't so steady or so equitable for everyone. So I want us to think about resilience not as bouncing back, but as moving forward and navigating disruption while we build that muscle and get stronger. Resilience is not just about surviving the disruption, it's about thriving on the other side of it. That's the muscle that we're trying to build as individuals, in our organizations, in our networks, and in our communities. And then the final thing I'd like you to have in mind is about leaders and leadership. You may be in this room just starting out in your career, or maybe you're just new to this field. Maybe you're further along, but you're not the boss, and maybe you don't aspire to be. But we're still talking to you today, right? Leadership happens at all levels of an organization. It happens at all levels of a network, at all levels of a community, and that's the way that it should be. So when we're talking about leaders and leadership today, we are talking to everyone in this room. Anyone can adopt a nimble leadership mindset. Anyone can be a leader that facilitates resilience. So there'll be a pop quiz later. Those are the 4 things. Now we're gonna jump into our conversation. Heather, I am gonna come to you first. We are 6 years out from a global pandemic, COVID-19. And we know that New York City was hit very early and very severely by that pandemic. Your organization was focused very much on programming pre-COVID, and that was disrupted almost immediately. Can you talk about the pivot that you made in that moment and how you involved a network of your peer organizations to do that?
Yes, thank you. So although we had been set up almost 40 years ago as a mechanism for the New York City's Parks Department to bring in private dollars, we pretty much stopped doing that a couple of years after our founding. So we were really focused on programming, as you said, music festivals, sports instructions for kids, all of that obviously had to stop. But we are also one of the only citywide organizations on the private side focused on parks and open spaces. So, of course, we all shut down March 13th, and suddenly we didn't know what to do. And we were all panicking because the city's budget was being cut, and the many, many conservancies and friends groups that rely on private dollars weren't able to raise that money anymore. Most use in-person events, galas, receptions to bring people together to raise money, and that wasn't going to be possible. And yet, particularly in New York, which is so dense, if you don't go to your park, you're not going outside at all. Like, you don't have a backyard. You're in tiny little apartments, and every little park serves as somebody's backyard or their living room. So our parks were packed. So a whole bunch of us got together and just started talking to one another. There are several people in the front row who helped with that. So it was a group effort. I'm the spokesperson here, but honestly, there were about 20 of us that got together and just started talking on a Zoom call. And what do? We need money. New York City was really good about setting up a relief fund. A couple of the big foundations that are local, Ford and a couple of others, but nobody could tell us whether or not parks groups were eligible for this money. So we started calling around and saying, hey, like, we're open. You know, we understand that other people need money, but we desperately need money because our parks are packed. Within 3 weeks, we had raised $1.5 million. We put together committees. We had a fundraising committee. We had a press committee. We wrote a report on the state of parks in a month. By May, we had raised $3 million, and by the end of June, we had gotten the first checks out the door. And honestly, when I went back to look at that schedule, like, I don't know how we did that. I honestly don't know. Other than we had this incredible group of colleagues that just dug in and got it done. And I have to say, aside from my friends who work in the parks world, it was an equally important role for funders. And we have one of my friends from one of the foundations that contributed here today, Chelsea Smith from the Altman Foundation. The foundations got on the phone too, and they made phone calls and they said, you need to give to this. This is really important if you care about parks. And New York honestly came together and we helped support one another to get through what was an unspeakable experience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Heather. I think everyone in this room can relate to having to make some pretty quick but really difficult decisions. First early on during COVID, but then as it dragged on. So we're going to come back and unpack that story a little further. But Norma, I want to come to you next. While everyone can relate to COVID, I think more and more communities can also relate to the increasing number of natural and human-made environmental disasters that are coming to our community. And I'm thinking about the catastrophic fires last year in LA. Norma, can you talk a bit about not only how your agency responded quickly as this catastrophe was unfolding, but you elected to do so using the tenets of trauma-informed care. Can you talk about why you did that and how?
Thank you, Lynn. First, I'd like to just set context in regards to what started on January 7, 2025. Two of the three most catastrophic fires in the state of California in modern history were raging at the same time. One in Pacific Palisades, the other in Altadena. And to give perspective, Altadena is an unincorporated community in Los Angeles County. To give a little history, is at a time where Los Angeles County had redlining. African American, Black and brown communities in the community of Altadena that's where they purchased homes because they weren't allowed to purchase homes in other places in Los Angeles. There is a rich and vibrant culture of diversity, of multi-generational families, of people who loved their environment, their trails, their majestic trees, who built multi-generational relationships with their neighbors and their community. I think a couple years ago, you would have said that it's one of the most thriving communities in Los Angeles County. And on January 7th, everything changed. The Eaton Fire destroyed over 9,400 structures. Over 6,100 households, homes, families lost everything. But to put it in perspective in regards to children lost their schools. They lost their pictures, the teddy bears, their pets, the playgrounds, every park. All 6 parks in Altadena burned or damaged. Their schools, their neighbors, all lost. We in LA County immediately, because we have our park system there, many of our employees lost everything. By the Friday, just a couple days after the fire, we understood that thousands of families were moving into the Pasadena Convention Center. 34 childcare facilities lost, but we wanted to center showing up for children, which was something I think we had no blueprint to do. But we had understood that in these catastrophic events, children would live with the trauma for decades of this tremendous loss. And so on Friday, just 3 days after the fires, they were still raging. Fires raged for over 2 weeks consecutively. On a Friday, we decided to open up care camps, a place where as families were sleeping in their cars, crashing in neighbors or friends' living rooms, all hotels were filled, that we can provide a safe place for play, to care and nurture children, while their parents and their caretakers and their guardians figured out where they were going to sleep, how they were going to clothe themselves the next day. On Friday, we said to LA County Park staff, we're going to ask you to volunteer to be part of care camps. By 7:30 that morning, over 50 staff showed up. By 12 o'clock that afternoon, over 100 staff showed up. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, over 300 staff showed up. What also had happened is that we opened up our slots for care camp. And within the first hour, our 250 slots for care camp were filled. In 3 weeks, we served 2,600 children. We provided supportive services for children and families, and I can talk a little bit about what we did in the next question.
Yeah, thanks, Norma. Incredible. So you'll remember earlier I said that the source of disruption isn't always negative. Disruption can come from a positive place. So Dan, I'm going to bring you into the conversation because the disruption that you're going to share is something many organizations dream about. It is an unprecedented, very significant philanthropic investment. Can you talk about how you navigated that disruption, but also stay true to your mission?
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Lynn, for that opportunity. And just a little bit of background information. Our organization is a regional nonprofit organization that works on a national heritage area and a multi-use regional trail that goes 101 miles in Northeast Ohio. And we work with over 150 different public-private partners, foundations, corporations, units of government, churches, universities, to preserve historic buildings, conserve natural areas, and promote the development of regional trails. And the most important core value that we have is, we are committed to co-creating, co-designing accessible, equitable, and welcoming parks, trails, and public spaces. And so in 2015, we were approached by these national funders, the JPP Foundation, Knight Foundation, Kresge, and William Penn Foundation. How might we develop these great public spaces where everybody feels welcome, everybody can come together and spend time together? Because as been mentioned earlier, we're living in a society where we're facing issues of isolation, distrust, segregation, and so how might parks, trails, and public spaces be transformed into connected, vibrant assets that foster community trust, equity, and civic pride? And the four values that the national funders wanted us to focus us on was relationship building, social economic mixing, value creation, and also environmental sustainability. And so Akron, we threw our hat in the ring, said yes to something I'm not sure what we knew we were saying yes to. The way that the funders described it was it's sort of like flying the plane while you're building it. And so we were incredibly blessed and humbled to be selected along with Philadelphia, Memphis, and Detroit to be the first pilot cities on this national initiative. It's later grown to, many of our Civic Commons partners are here in the room, to include Camden, Charlotte, Cincinnati, Lexington, Macon, San Jose, and the Twin Cities. And so together we are all learning how this can be applied at the local level. And in Akron in particular, we focus on 3 miles of the Ohio and Erie Canal Towpath Trails that goes through the city of Akron because we knew through doing community surveys that this was 3 miles that our residents were in some cases avoiding, as well as our 2.5 million hikers and bicyclists. And so we basically asked ourselves is how might we change that? And really, there are 3 partners who deserve all the credit in this adventure that we went on. Certainly, first of all, the residents, because we wanted to make sure that the residents were centered in our work. Because unfortunately, in Akron and in many communities across the country, there's been a legacy of things done to residents and not with, and there's been a legacy of things promised and not delivered. And so they chose to be vulnerable in this initiative. The second group that really deserves all the credit is the city of Akron itself, because they also chose to take a risk. Because we basically went to them and said, hey, we got this crazy idea about how might we create these great public civic assets without a plan in place. We didn't have a plan for operations and maintenance. But were you willing to go along and take that risk? And then third certainly are the funders, because they provided the capital, the risk capital, so that we actually could take those opportunities. And so, as you can see by the slides here, we started out with just building relationships with neighborhood residents, but we really were left with met with a gulf of mistrust because of that legacy of things done to and not with. And then the next slide, illustrates, how might we, overcome distrust. And one of the things we learned from one of our national thought leaders, Mitchell Silver, the former park commissioner of New York City, is we can talk about all these great things until we're blue in the face, but until people actually experience them, that's when they actually really start to feel that change. And the next slide actually really talks about the importance of keeping our residents at the center of our work, because we truly believe that everybody, regardless of your age, your income, education, gender, experience, everybody deserves great parks, trails, and public spaces. And then the next slide really talks about the importance of developing trust. And that, oftentimes we talk about we need to do a project, but you can't do a project until you have that relationship. And really the last slide really illustrates what can happen when you truly do build authentic and trusting relationships with your neighborhood residents.
Dan, thank you. I still remember my first visit to Akron, just as we were getting started, and you took me to Summit Lake. And I grew up in a mid-sized Rust Belt city myself, so we have a river in my city, but we don't have this gorgeous lake. And we got there, and there was one bench at Summit Lake that faced away from the water. And I thought, oh, we really have an opportunity here. And so it's just really an amazing story of transformation, but to your point, you moved at the speed of trust, and that's how you got where you are today. So each of you has already touched on the importance of collaboration in your work, but certainly specifically when you're responding to disruption. Norma, I want to come back to you because I want to unpack some of the mechanics of this. As you alluded to, you had a great response from volunteers, a great response from your fellow agencies, but your response also catalyzed some pretty big changes in how you collaborated with funders. Can you talk a little bit more about what was different this time and why it was different?
Thank you, Lynn. I want to start by saying that during the 3 weeks, we realized that we didn't have the capacity to do all of this work all by ourselves. And so we asked for help. And the help in really catastrophic times came in emails, phone calls, and even social media. We realized that we had built relationships throughout the county, and this is where we needed to count on those relationships to help us. Over 80 community-based organizations helped to mobilize resources and support. We realized that children and parents wanted field trips. The Dodgers Foundations, the Rams, the Los Angeles County Museum, they all developed programming. The LA Opera, Center Stage. We had the most incredible, robust programming. World Central Kitchen and folks came in to provide over 36,000 meals. In a matter of almost instantly, 6 cities provided mutual aid. I want to say park and recreation agencies provided mutual aid, and we had a total of over 500 staff that were working to help support children in this time of need. And philanthropy saw this, and they called, and they said, what can we do to help? The California Community Foundation, I remember at 8 o'clock at night, said, we're going to give you a grant, and this grant is significant. This will let other funders know that we've vetted you and that we trust and we believe in what you're doing. That money was wired in less than a couple days. The Kaiser Foundation sent money. Skechers Foundation sent money. And it started happening. And then we got a big call from Fire Aid, who had received funding from throughout, people that just wanted to help the LA region in the recovery. And they said, what can we do to help children in Altadena? And that was significant because our whole attempt to really ensure that children healed through play, through social connection, to receiving mental and supportive services, that they healed through field trips and everything that we were doing through the care camps. Philanthropy saw, and not just validated that, they wanted to really highlight that and lift that up. They gave us a $2.4 million grant, which was the catalyst to rebuild our first park in less than 4 months. And why that was important? Because I talked about 34 childcare facilities and homes were built. There was no childcare infrastructure left in Altadena. So our children would go back to schools, as parents would go back to work. Who was going to care for children? We needed to stand up a park so that children and parents had a safe place to continue to be nurtured. And we did that. When you think about businesses lost, I think about my first summer jobs, right? It's all of the jobs that we, at restaurants or at parks. There were no summer jobs for youth or places to hang out, no electricity. Imagine a community just burnt. youth couldn't just hang out in front of their front yards. And so we stood up our park and our teen center. We provided meals. We developed a transportation system. But we built back a most glorious, beautiful playground that served as a place to continue to heal through play in Altadena. But it was because of those funders who saw the work in action, who saw us mobilize in such a way that was very intentional, that was very strategic, that was really about supporting youth, and then they came in to help and support. I will say that in 1 year, in partnership with the LA County Parks Foundation, even though we haven't received $1 of FEMA funding for the recovery of 6 Altadena parks, philanthropy, private donations, we have fundraised over $64 million for the recovery of our Altadena parks.
Norma, thank you for sharing that. I think it's such a great example of how quickly you can mobilize, right? A lot of elbow grease in there, a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, a lot of networking going on, but you were able to quickly mobilize. I want to talk about the flip side of that, Dan, and come back to you, and maybe Heather, to you as well. You know, I work with partners all across the country, and most of those partners are working in collaboration, working on coalition building. And one thing I hear very consistently is the skills that we needed to pull the collaboration together, pull the coalition together, don't necessarily translate to what we need to hold that coalition together, especially over the long arc of this work. So Dan, I'll come to you first, and Heather, please feel free to jump in. You are 10 plus years into Civic Commons now. Can you talk about what you've learned from holding together that multi-sector coalition driving this work? What does it take to keep people aligned over that length of time?
No, I appreciate the question, Lynn, and I kind of would put them in kind of 3 different buckets. And our key partners there, certainly the residents, how do we, continue to maintain, their engagement, not only their engagement, their investment. How do we, initially, how do we get the city of Akron to buy into this process and also maintain their commitment, and as well as the funders. And so there's really kind of 3 key partners, and each of them kind of required a little bit of a different strategy. The first group of the residents is, is really how do we build trust? How do we get them to consider to be vulnerable? Because, when you've been dismissed and you've not been invested in, for just decades, we were met with skepticism. And so what we basically had to do was continue to show up, be present, seek understanding while listening, and just make sure that our words matched our deeds. And so I give the residents all the credit because they were the ones that chose to be vulnerable. They chose to take a risk. And to me, we have meetings on a regular basis, monthly meetings in the neighborhoods. We've done that for the past 11 years. Like in the Highway Canal Park neighborhood, kind of the area in between downtown and Summit Lake, we have a Highway Canal Park steering committee. We gather together over food and celebrate, our successes and also dream about our future aspirations. One of our aspirations that's now coming to fruition this summer is a pickleball tournament that the residents wanted to put on. And so we're helping them with that. Ramon Wilder was actually here in the audience. He's actually coordinating that on our behalf. We have a summer concert series. So I think with the residents, it's making sure that your words match your deeds, you're present, you show up consistently. And with the city of Akron, they just deserve a tremendous amount of credit because they chose to take a risk on this. And the other thing that's important is that this initiative, you mentioned the past 11 years, it spanned 2 administrations. And oftentimes, I think one of the challenges in our work is elected officials, not all the time, but sometimes they have a tendency to work in periods of 2, 4, and 6 years. That's the time frame that they're looking at. But the work that we do is transformational. It's generational. It's 5, 10, 15, 25 years. And so I think there's a tension in that. But we are so grateful to the Horgan administration for initially committing to this, willingness to take a chance. And currently the Malik administration is doing the exact same thing. And so they've really doubled down. And really the significance from the city of Akron's perspective is they made a priority to basically use their American Rescue Plan dollars to invest in these parks, trails, and public spaces. And to me, that's where Al was mentioning it earlier. In my opinion, That's one of the main outcomes of the pandemic. Parks, trails, and public spaces are no longer just non-essential services. They are truly essential services, just like water, sewer, safety. And I think we need to keep hammering away at that. And then lastly, I think it's just the funders. We're so grateful to the Knight Foundation, the City of Akron, the Akron Community Foundation, the Summit County Government. We gather as a core team. And we've done that. We have representatives from about 25 different organizations, and we have CEOs, we have frontline staff. Dee Falconer actually is up here in the front row from the Summit Metro Parks. And so for the past 11 years, we've met once a month at our offices. Again, breaking bread around food, and just asking ourselves, how might we as a community address these issues and work together to leverage resources so that we truly can co-design, co-steward accessible, equitable, and welcoming parks, trails, and public spaces.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Heather, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to me was to remember to just be generous and be vulnerable, because my experience had been that, let's say there are between 50 and 75 nonprofit conservancies that are working in parks, not even counting any of the friends groups. We all knew each other, but we weren't sharing information in any significant way. And we were in some ways competitive. We all have to raise money, and there's a finite number of people who are going to give you that money. And, we at City Parks Foundation made the decision early on just to ignore that and bring people together and open up and talk about, what your license with the city says and what the terms are, or invite funders to meet all of the conservancies, and that never happened before. So I just think the way that we built trust was to just make information available to people, and they will share back with you.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I want to sort of keep in this collaboration space and get more specific and talk about buy-in, right? I think what's clear when we're responding to disruption is almost certainly it's going to require some pretty big swings, some pretty big pivots. But sometimes our bosses or our funders or our boards aren't quite tracking with us, right? Maybe they're not quite seeing the vision, or they're not quite on the same timing, and they need a little bit of a nudge. Heather, I'm going to come back to you, because early on, your board gave you a little bit of pushback on this work, and so I would love to hear about how you navigated that, and how did that experience inform how you work with your board now?
I truly believed with every fiber of my being that this was something that City Parks Foundation needed to do. Nobody else was in a position to take in money and re-grant it. The New York Community Trust, which is a huge trust in New York, said they couldn't do it. So if it was not us, it was nobody. My board was not so supportive, even though we do have a history of making grants, and CPF had done this around September 11th. We had taken in some money and had re-granted, but they were terrified. They were terrified for our existence. And, I spent hours and hours with my board saying, you just have to let me do this. Just believe me. Just like, we'll get money out of this, I promise you. And it really took several years for board members to understand the value of what we're doing, both for us as an organization and for the field that we are supporting in New York. I have to say that by sharing information, at least I was able to say to my board, well, this is what they're experiencing, and this is what they're experiencing, and let's take that and learn from it, because I'm able to share that information, collect it, and share it back with all of you. But it's really only the last year or two that they've really understood the role that CPF now plays in the fabric of New York nonprofit stewards. And I was fighting with them not to fire our entire staff just because they thought, well, federal money's not going to cover it, just get rid of everybody. And I thought, that's the worst thing I've ever heard. So why would you do that? Like, now's the time to support your staff, not get rid of them. But I think now they finally get it.
Great, thanks for sharing that. I think probably many of us have an experience like that where the board's just not getting it. And it can be difficult to navigate. So I think in the spirit of transparency, it's important that we share those stories, right? Everything does not sort of neatly align as we do this work. And so I think it's important to share that we all go through that and what that moment is, but you still got the work done. Everyone wasn't fired, which is great.
I mean, you need an ally.
Yes.
You definitely need an ally. And I had one or two allies on the board, but it really took a long time to convince everybody else that this was not just draining our bank account, and it was actually bringing significant value.
Yeah, I want to talk about that intentionality, and Dan, bring you back into the conversation. One of the things that really impressed me about the way that you led Akron Civic Commons was how intentional you were internally with your own board, right, to make sure that they were aligned, because Civic Commons was bigger, aligned with your mission, but bigger than your mission. And you also touched already a bit on your relationship with the city, but the reality is this was not a priority for the city at the start of Akron Civic Commons. So can you talk about those two audiences, how you were intentional in really getting them on board and aligned with this work?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And so when we first started the initiative, Kyle Kuda, chief of the Knapp Foundation, he and I marched ourselves down to City Hall. We also marched ourselves to the county office, and we made the pitch because we recognized that we really needed to have both the county and the city bought into this whole hog. And fortunately, when we asked them to say, "Are you in for Reimagined Civic Commons?" They said, "Sure," not knowing really what sure meant. But they chose to take that risk. But then we also invited them into our core team. So it really embedding them into our process. But the other thing we recognize is it's one thing to have that buy-in at the executive level, at the very highest level, but you've also got to have it at the middle manager level. You got to have it at the front line level. So we also were very intentional about making sure that at every level of the organization, we had their engagement. Because as we all know, sometimes the executive can say, sure, they're going to do something, but it's the frontline people and it's the middle manager people who are really going to make sure it gets done. They're going to execute it. So that was really one of our other strategies. And then the other thing we did, particularly with our board, is we made sure that we had board participation in the core team. So I had board members who were actively participating in the process because, similar to what Heather was talking about, I was also met with similar skepticism. But the way we were able to pitch it is that these are assets all connected by the Ohio and Erie Canal Towpath Trail. So the work we're doing is complementary to it, and it really is resident-led, and so that's why we need to be part of the process. And since we have over a 25-year history of working with residents, it was really in perfect alignment with our mission and overall organization.
Thanks for sharing that. I think both what you and Heather are sort of getting at with this buy-in piece is also how important sort of learning, right? Learning while doing is. And so I want to talk a bit about this idea of a culture of learning. Norma, I'm going to come back to you. What insights can you share about the experience of the past year on the importance of embedding learning and adaptation into the crisis response, right? So sometimes we think about, we're going to do the study later, after, right? We'll get those insights after it's over. But you actually embedded a process while you were responding. Can you talk through what that looked like and why it was so important?
Thank you, Lynn. First, for those of you that are sitting there and saying, oh, it's LA County, you're a big agency, I want you to know that there is no blueprint, no guide, no protocols. And as a 24-year veteran, nothing prepared me or my team for this moment. And we didn't have the answers. But what I learned from COVID was that we were all trying to figure it out. And do you remember the COVID years where we're like learning on the spot? And then we'd course correct, and we show up to be relevant. I think that is what we held on to. I remember when we opened care camps on Monday, at 7:30, there was already a line of parents. And I actually wanted to be there to greet the first youth and the families. As the parent was coming in, we walked her in with her daughter. Her daughter came in, and her daughter immediately ran to play, which actually was pretty glorious. And as soon as the child left the sight of the parent, the mother almost yelled in an incredible cry that I still will never forget that moment. And in that moment, I realized that as a mother, what she was holding onto for the last couple of days, what she was holding onto for that child, so that the child can show up and go run and play. We course corrected. What was course corrected? The next day, not only that did our children have mental health workers, but we set up a parent station with coffee, with pan dulce, with bread, and mental health workers. And every day of that camp, there was mental health workers, and the group grew from 5 to 10, 15, 20 parents that sometimes didn't want to go back to the convention center, to their cars, the hotels, that just wanted to connect. We realized that our African American community didn't trust government. They felt that we failed, the government had failed them because they weren't being reached when the emergency notifications were going on. And so we realized that even though our Black community had been devastated by this fire, the numbers of those children that were accessing our care camp didn't reflect that. We course corrected because we have long-standing policy of hiring local community folks into our park system who are ambassadors, and we immediately course corrected. We got in a room and we said, how do we reach out in a time where families are all over the county? We worked with the churches. We worked with groups that were trusted ambassadors to get the information out. As families were staying in hotels and in cars and at the Pasadena Convention Center, they didn't leave with suitcases. And so as children were coming back to care camp, we started hearing immediately that there were no clean undergarments for children or clothing. And after losing everything, they didn't want to stand in long lines to get clothes. So we immediately mobilized to create a shopping experience so that every child, as they were leaving care camp the next day, can go to an area with a nice shopping bag and shop for the clothing so that they can come back the next day. Then children started saying, we lost our pets. So we mobilized to make sure that we had a lot of stuffed animals that were donated, but also we had therapy dogs. But what happened is every night, our team, after being exhausted, 7 a.m., and we never left or stopped the camp until the last child was there. Not like typical where you charge parents $10 for being late. Because we knew that some were traveling far and in traffic to pick up their child. And so even though the last child was to be picked up at 7:30, 8 o'clock, we greeted them with a smile. And then after every day, we got in a circle and we said, what did we hear? What did we see? What do we feel? And what can we do? And our mighty team course corrected from 8:30 at night to 7 o'clock, 8 in the morning. We didn't know that we were going to open the doors and keep care camps going for 3 weeks, but schools who had burned couldn't open the doors, and so we were committed to that. And I just want to say, I think that is the power of our profession. We're humanitarians first, and we do whatever it takes, even if we don't have the answers, to learn and to help and to show up when we are needed.
Yeah, Norma, thank you. I would go a step further and say that you are nimble humanitarians, right? I mean, that really, that learning and adaptation in real time. Well, as you also mentioned, right, you all lost things too in the fire, right? It's happening to you as well as you're figuring this out. So thank you for sharing that. Dan, I want to talk about another approach to learning and adaptation, and that's prototyping in physical space. So temporary installations, pop-up programming, you use that really strategically in Akron Civic Commons. Can you talk about what you gained from doing that and how you connected it to the longer-term investment?
Absolutely. And in addition to the grant dollars from these national funders, which is very substantial and really impactful, equally important is this learning network of all these 11 cities across the country. Because oftentimes you feel like you're out there on your own and you're trying to solve issues that are generational, but you don't really necessarily have the resources. But through this national network of all these different cities across the country, it's incredibly helpful and insightful. And so one of the lessons we learned from Detroit, our great partners, Alexa Bush, is that early on in their process, they tested ideas light, quick, and cheap. They use the word cheap. I don't like cheap because that implies value. So we use light, quick, and inexpensive. And what I love about that approach is, you mentioned it earlier about the one bench. And I know there was a little bit of a chuckle there, but oh yeah, there's only one bench in the lake. It didn't even face the lake. But in reality, how sad is that? You've got a 100-acre lake in the center of an urban environment, one bench. What does that say about how we care about each other and the asset?
That's right.
And we literally documented, we did surveys, we hired neighborhood residents of where folks would drive to Summit Lake, pull soccer chairs out of their cars and sit in a hot asphalt parking lot because there was no place to sit. And what's really very aggravating is, whether it's in Akron or other surrounding communities, there are plenty of beautifully designed park trails and public spaces, primarily for white, more affluent communities, but not in our black and brown communities in the center of an urban city. And so, to your point, if we were to say to Summit Lake residents, well, we're going to do this great park plan, it's going to cost $250,000, but you're not going to have a bench. And so we tested the idea. We literally went to the local hardware store, got those plastic Adirondack chairs, and just put them out there. And if those Adirondack chairs, they had legs, obviously, but if they decide to walk away, that's okay. But at least there was a place for people to sit. We heard from neighborhood residents, and their number one priority is they just want a place to sit, talk, and have a grill. So we tested that idea. We put out benches, we put out grills, we put out umbrellas. And believe me, we actually got plenty of feedback from other parts of the community, oh, don't do it because the residents won't take care of it. Well, that's racial bias, and it's wrong. But what we learned is, when you ask residents what they want and you deliver on that, make sure your words match your deeds, then you're doing things with them and not to them. And it's their park. And so what we learned from that is people love that. They wanted more. We initially put up a tent where they might have family gatherings, family reunions, birthday parties, wedding receptions, retirement parties. And we put a tent up intentionally because we didn't know if it was in the right place, was the right size. It was loved so much, we partnered with Summit Metro Parks, we built a permanent picnic pavilion. That picnic pavilion is just in constant use now at Summit Lake. And so, this whole idea of prototyping, it gives you the idea of test things light, quick, and inexpensive, learn from it, and iterate and improve upon it. Now, I got to be honest with you, it's not all fairy dust and ponies here. City of Akron, or government agencies, when you first use that term prototyping, they kind of look at you like, yeah, really? You're going to prototype? You're going to test something? And our response was, well, sure. If we test it and it doesn't work, it's all removable. And what was interesting, that one word, removable, you can literally see their whole body language change. Really? You're going to take it out? Now, I will tell you, in front of all you folks, and I got some folks in the city of Akron here today, we had no intention of removing it. But because we knew if we did it right and it was responsive to the residents, it would be embraced. It would be stewarded. And that's exactly what's happened. Not everything's been perfect. And again, it provided us with an opportunity to test the idea. Two quick examples. One, we heard from the neighborhood residents, they want something more to do at Summit Lake besides just play basketball. They want to do fishing. They want to bird watch. They want to do nature club. So Dee Falconer with the Summit Metro Parks came up with this great idea. Why don't we do a pop-up nature center? We're like, sure. And we, in a partnership with the Akron Metropolitan Housing Authority, we did a pop-up nature center for 3 years. It was loved to death by the neighborhood residents. It was constantly the nature club, the kids were there fishing and doing canoeing. We provided the canoeing. It's so popular, then Summit Metro Parks doubled down. They actually built a $2.2 million permanent nature center in the Summit Lake neighborhood because of that initial prototyping. And it's really thanks to our, yes, absolutely. So our partners there at Summit Metro Parks. And so what's to me really exciting is now to see that whole idea of prototyping, it's now embedded. We now have our City of Akron partners. They've embraced, prototyping and testing of ideas. And to me, it's really a testament to, again, the great learning network, the great work from Philadelphia, Detroit, Memphis, and sharing that with Akron because we love all those ideas out there. We're going to copy them and bring them back to Akron.
Thanks, Dan. I think the key here, though, is that the pop-ups were tied to longer-term investment, right? So I think a lot of folks get excited about temporary installations, but it's not tied to the bigger picture. It's not tied to that more permanent investment. And that's where you lose the trust that you've built with residents. But you were very intentional in, yes, we're testing things out, we're gonna learn and adapt, but this is tied to this larger plan, this larger strategy of delivering on promises. And I think that's really the key connection point there.
Absolutely. And then one of our other testing that was a little bit more challenging was the trail around the lake.
Yes.
Because initially, the neighborhood residents, everybody in the community said, we want to have a trail all the way, go all the way around the lake. I don't know too many lakes in America that you have a trail that just go down one side of the lake. and again, we kind of laugh, but in Akron, that's the way it was. It was a towpath trail. And so when we started asking questions and having neighborhood meetings, we encountered, opposition. And I think it's, as I was explaining earlier to a group, to me, it's like kind of three buckets, if you will. Partners here obviously know that oftentimes, sometimes people have this perception of trails, they bring in people from the outside and people are gonna do crazy things like take my porch furniture or have a picnic in their front yard. And we all know those things don't happen. And so there's this misperception about trails. But then the second issue is change. Sometimes people just don't like change. If you ask my wife Nancy at home, if she moves something around and I can't find something, I don't like change. But in the Summit Lake neighborhood, in all honesty, we encountered something a little bit worse because it's literally Summit Lake connects two different neighborhoods that are very diverse. On the one side is primarily mixed, racial perspective, communities of color, Asian, Hispanic, and on the other side, it is primarily white Appalachia, higher income levels, higher home values. And one of the messages we literally heard from one of the meetings is we don't want those people on my side of the lake. And that's hurtful. And it's wrong, and it's racial bias. And so we had to encounter that, in our meeting and basically say, look, it's not right. It's everybody's lake. As I said previously, everybody deserves access to accessible, equitable, welcoming parks, trails, and public spaces. And so that's why we tested the idea of a trail for 2 years. None of those bad things happened. And then to me, the best thing is some of those people who are basically opposed to the trail came around and said, just go ahead and build it anyway. And now they're actively using the trail all the way around Summit Lake.
Yes. Thank you, Dan. Well, I think that we are getting close to time. So we got our please wrap up sign here. So we're gonna speed through with our wrap up. I want to make sure that we end on a hopeful note and an action note. So I'm going to ask each speaker briefly to respond to 2 questions. What is something that is giving you hope from your practice or what you're seeing in the field? And then the second part is really directed towards our audience. What's a call to action that you hope that these folks will take up as a result to listening into this conversation? So just briefly, what's giving you hope and a call to action? Who would like to kick us off?
This is me? Okay.
Sure.
Go ahead, Heather.
What's giving me hope? I think, the New York City Green Fund was meant to be a 3-year temporary relief fund. What's giving me hope is that it is continuing, and it's continuing because funders are telling us that it's valuable and it's creating change. And we are seeing now a permanent coalition of conservancies working together in New York City in a way that we never have before. And that gives me a lot of hope. What was the second question?
Call to action. What would you like folks to do?
I think what I have learned from this experience and what my call to action is just say yes. But even if it's scary, and seemingly impractical, I think we took a risk in a way that I never would have expected of myself, and yet when you say yes, you get results that are amazing. So just say yes.
I love that. Norma, Dan?
What gives me hope, I'll just say, I saw a family with 2 children walking in Altadena, walking to our park. And it's very rare because we only have about 60 houses built now. There's about 1,000 in construction. So there's still a really tough area. People don't walk. And he was 2 little girls, and one was on a scooter, and I actually stalked them. And then when I noticed that, the parent noticed that I was stalking them, I had to get out of my car and say I work for the Parks Department. And then I said, it just gives me so much joy to see you walking to our park in Altadena. And the father said, we lost our home, but this playground, thank you Landscape Structures, this playground is my children's favorite place, and we had to rent a home here in Altadena. Sometimes we think that the little things are little and they don't make a difference. They absolutely do. And in that moment, I realized the power of parks in a deeper way, the power of play, and the power of public spaces to give people hope. And their story, their believing in the renewal of Altadena gave me hope. The takeaway is we may not know what we're doing at the time. We may be building the airplane and flying the airplane. But I think if we trust in the people that do this powerful work and purposeful work, and if we center the children and families, I do believe everything works out.
Thank you. Dan?
Just to build up on, these great comments here, what gives me hope is that now more than ever, our work is more important.
That's right.
That, in the past, couple hundred years, parks and trails were, I think, considered nice to have. Truly, they are essential services. We know they are. And actually, our elected officials know they are. And then, in terms of a call to action, I kind of want to build on what Al was mentioning earlier. One of my favorite books that I share with many folks is by Colin Powell, former Secretary of State, Lessons I Learned in Life and Leadership. He had 13 rules on his desk. And one of his rules is one that Al had mentioned, is that optimism is a force multiplier. Mm-hmm. And I love that, because if you believe you can, you absolutely can. And then he also had a great phrase, to build on the comments that we've shared this afternoon, is that show more kindness than seems necessary because the other person needs it more than you'll ever know. Mm-hmm. And what I really love about that is here is a guy, with the highest power of responsibility and influence in our government, but yet he made a point of keeping those values and rules, in his life. And so to me, that's very inspirational.
Wise words, thank you. So that's our time.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being with us. I'll just note, if you want to learn more about Heather's story, she has another panel coming up. She just can't stop talking about this work right after the break that we're going to go into. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon and look forward to seeing you during the rest of the conference. Thank you. Thank you.